hello, and welcome everyone. Excuse me. Welcome everyone to Systems Lab Live. Excited. This is the June 19th edition. And I have a question for you all. As we settle in, make sure that you put your name, put what you're working on. We are we are 19 days in. As I just said, it's June 19th, but we're a little bit over half of the month. So I'd love to know, what is it that you all are working on? What goals are you working towards? But tonight's question is great. We are talking about what happens when a client in the middle of the project just starts to send emails and says, "Hey, I'd love it if you all would work on tasks X, Y, and Z," right? And so we're going to be talking through what happens and how do you navigate when a client wants additional work, And so this is a really important question, and we're going to be looking at it through the lens of us as project managers, but we're also going to look at it also from an operations perspective as well. But this is going to be a really good conversation here tonight. And so definitely engage in the comments. We are live on LinkedIn, we're live on YouTube, and we are live on Instagram Live. So let's just get into this. Why is this important? Why is this topic important? Well, I'll tell you why. Because one of the things that I realized in one of my community groups, a few of them have been talking a lot about lately, which is how do we navigate these particular issues with clients, especially when you're meeting with clients and they're saying, "Hey, this is great, but I'd love it if we could do this." And this is usually an additional task, or it's usually something where we are looking to rewrite the particular direction of what the project is supposed to be, or what its intended goal is. And that's really what's happening when your clients are coming to you and saying, "Hey, we got a new client request." Okay. And if you work in an agency, this happens a lot. Or if you are a freelance project manager, you have your own business, this is something that will come up. And so I remember working on it with an agency, and this would happen often. And before we get into some of these use cases, I do want to talk about, like, what are our big takeaways from tonight's presentation, like what we're talking about here tonight. And so, number one, I want to say this, like, as a project manager, here's the deal. It is your responsibility to protect the time, the cost, and the resources of the project. And that's from your team's perspective, from the project perspective, and the client as well. It is your responsibility to ensure that the time, the costs, and the resources are in direct alignment, and that you are protecting what's going on, right? What does that mean, Ashley? Break that down. That means that you have to be able to, inside of your contracts, be able to set the expectations of ensuring that anything that you're producing. So let's say that you are managing a website project, you're managing a podcast tour. Your job is to, who's leading this out, your job is to protect the resources. That is the materials, that is anything, that's the people, that's anything that's tangible, right? Software, the time that it takes to do the tasks, the people, what else is there? The money, right? You have to be able to protect all of that for the integrity of the project and for your client, and what is the outcome of the project itself. So I think this is really important that we understand what our particular role is. Sure, they're always going to say PMs are here to just go on and do the work, go on and execute. But there's so much more that we have for that. And all right, the other point I want to make too is that adjusting the contract means adjusting the expectations, deadlines, tasks, accountability, costs, etc. We don't want to we can't miss this point. Adjusting the contract means adjusting the expectations. Adjusting the contract means adjusting the expectations. Here's the thing. When a request comes in the middle of a project, this just means just that. Hey, I want to add another page to the website project. Okay. That just means that we have to adjust our expectations around how much it's going to cost. What's the risk? Meaning, what's the particular impact that it could have, negative or positive? Let me run that back. When we talk about risk, we're talking about what could unexpectedly occur that's negative or positive that could impact the outcome of the project. We're talking about we just talked about costs. We're talking about adding on to the deadline of the original agreed upon due date for when this was going to be completed. So now we have to adjust our expectations. Most of the time, many of our clients think that we can just do the work, we can just add on to it, and and nothing is going to be disrupted. And so it is our job, and this is why I say it is our responsibility to make sure that we're protecting the time, cost, and resources of the project. It is our job to explain, well, if we did take on this work, what would happen? And we'll get into that a little bit later. And thirdly, get it in writing. Documentation matters always. I'm never going to back down from that, y'all. Documentation matters all the time. Okay. So the top 3 things, just to recap, the top 3 things that we're focusing on, the key takeaways that you should leave away from this live stream. As a project manager, you're responsible for protecting time, cost, and the resources of the project. Adjusting the contract means adjusting the expectations. We're talking about deadlines, due dates, tasks, accountability, costs. Get it in writing. Documentation always. So as we settle into this, and we'll probably go into about 8:40-ish, 8:45-ish. We're going to get into it. Yeah, we're probably going to get another 35 minutes in. But it's going to be good. It's going to be good, y'all. And so what I want to start to get into is why contracts matter. Why do contracts matter? Why do you think you need contracts? Because I think at times, especially if you are, and let's just tap into the freelance PM world for a minute. We may think as we're starting out, child, we don't need nothing. Okay. We don't need anything. And that's not always true, right? Getting your legal affairs in order is something that we should be working towards. I'm saying we, because I'm putting myself in the mindset of when I started out. And one of the first things that I did was like, okay, I need someone to draw a contract for me. I need to make sure it's legit. Like I want to be legit about some things. I had one client, but what I did is I just worked towards, I saved money and I just worked towards what that cost would be for a lawyer to draw up a contract. And luckily, I had like a fresh law student who was really good at like contracts and negotiations and all that other good stuff, and really helped me out. It was actually a pretty decent price, if you ask me. But we were able to really work together. I was like, hey, this is what I'm looking to do. You know, I need a contract. So why do we need it? I want to say this is that for a few things, we need to formalize the scope of work. That's the first thing. So scope of work is essentially, what are you doing for this project? And then what aren't you doing for this project? So think of a line. Well, not a line, a circle. Think of it like a circle. If you were to draw a circle, and well, if I'm saying let's draw a circle, then, excuse me, y'all. Let me reach for this. Okay, here we go. We might as well just get into it. And I'm going to go to Notability so y'all can see what I mean by let's see what we mean by here. Okay. So this is what we want to do. 619. I'm going to share my screen. And here's the circle. All right. I'm going to share my screen so that you guys can kind of see it. Okay. All righty. Cool. Right, y'all see this? Boom. So in scope, meaning what's in scope? Boom. Like, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing? I'm gonna write it different. I'm gonna get a different color for this. Oh, I don't know if you can see that green. It's a little highlighted. What are you doing? And then what are you not doing? Okay. So that's what we mean. So the first thing we want to recognize when we talk about contracts, why contracts matter, is that we want to formalize the scope, number one. And so that's when we're looking at what's in play versus what am I not doing? So what are you doing? You are hosting or you're creating a website. Your package says, it's only for 5 websites, 5 web pages. It is whatever it is that's inside of your website package, blah, 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 blah. You have that formalized inside the contract. When a client says, well, can you design my logo? Can you embed 50 videos? And if that's not in scope, that means it's what? Out of scope. That's essentially what that means. So I think that's really important that we make that clear distinction. You're formalizing essentially what you're doing. This is the agreed upon, signed, legal, agreed upon document that says X company is going to do, or X consultant is going to perform this scope of work for client. And then that's it. Set the payment terms and protect both parties. You want to get paid. You want to get paid. And this is super important. Formalizing and saying and documenting and say, hey, it's going to cost $3,000 for this website package. It protects you and it protects the client, because inside of the contract, and whoever is your attorney that is going to draft this up, or you may also get it from like a legal template shop, which that is definitely a really good option. Casey Handy Smith is a great lawyer. We also have contracts coaches and company. I think that's what it's called for those that are in that industry. And I think that's really important for those that are in the online business space. There may be specific ones specific to your industry that you may want to look into, but it's going to protect yourself. It's going to protect you as well. Fostering clear communication. Hey, this is one of my favorite jams, which is the importance of understanding each other and what we're doing and why we're doing what we're doing, and making sure everybody's clear on the project, the scope of work, the deadlines, the deliverables, why we're doing what we're doing. So, contracts matter. And I'm just going to write this down here really quickly. Contracts matter. Why? Because they formalize scope of work. Ooh. And we're going to have we got the payment piece, and we have the protection piece. Let me roll this up too for a little bit for y'all. Okay. And the next thing I want to cover as well is that it protects your time. Come on. Because if you don't have the deadline, if you don't have due dates in place, and I'll tell you a quick story, is that a freelancer that I was talking with, this particular person didn't have a contract in place and was not clear with the client on when they would receive. It was a photographer. When they would receive, it was not clear to the client when they would receive the photos. Okay. So that then puts a negative spin on the client experience. It doesn't make or break it. We may not, we may not know. We don't want to take it that far, but it's very possible that if you don't have the appropriate documentation, that it will truly break the trust of the client. Something like deadlines and due dates, it's fixable if you catch it early. But this is why it's very important to say, this is how long this service will take. Case in point, ClickUp VIP Day. It's a done in a day experience, 5-6 hours. Okay. And it details in the proposal, as well as what's inside of the contract, what's in scope. Okay. So that we're very clear on that. We're very clear on when this is going to be completed. Right. So you do all these things up front and you get all of these things inside the contract, because you just want to, like we said, foster clear communication. You want to make sure that you're level setting expectations on both sides. How many of us feel or have felt that the client, the expectation is that now that we've been hired, see ya. I'll see you at the end. I'll drive my little golf cart to the finish line and I'll meet you there with the deliverable, right? So I think we have to make sure that there is this accountability on both sides. And I'm a firm believer that contracts help with this accountability piece. Absolutely. They help with the accountability piece, because it's not just, hey, you've hired me to do this job and then everything's on me. Part of, for my experience for ClickUp VIP Day, before we even get to even signing anything, I want to level set with my own clients to say, hey, I need to know that you have documented processes. Before we move forward, before any swiping McSwipies happen, I need to make sure, hey, now, that you have documented processes. Why does that matter? Because that impacts the deliverable, the time. Okay. Let me make sure I'm also breaking it down too and not using too many funky languages for you all. When I talk about deliverables specifically, I'm talking about the end product, the end result. It could be a process. It could be SOP. It could be a podcast episode. It could be a graphic design. It could be a video. Yeah, it could be setting up, your PM tool, whatever it is. So these are some of the reasons why contracts matter. Professionalism is also key as well. So I think this is extremely important, that we just continue to make sure that we underscore this importance of why we need contracts. We want to formalize the scope of work. We want to ensure we get paid for our work. We want to protect our time. We want to ensure that we want to foster clear communication, and that we also level set expectations. We want to make sure we're level setting expectations for what's to come when it comes to the work that's about to take place. For communication, like what's the expectation of the client to communicate? What type of assets that we may need when it comes to the work that's being done? It's not just a hands-off thing. Like once you're hired, I'll see you. Like just like I said before, it's not going to be like that. No, not at all. So, how we doing, y'all? How do y'all feel about those particular points? Because I think that's super, super important. All right. So as we move on, and if you guys have more that you want to dive into when it comes to contracts and the things that I just outlined, yeah, please put them below, because I think this is a really perfect conversation that we should be having when it comes to the legal aspects of doing the work. Now, I do want to say this, that if you are part of a large organization, you may never see, or you may never see the contract. You may just see the scope of work. So when I was working at an agency, and this was my first time working in the private sector, so that was fascinating all around. I was always have done government contracting or worked on a nonprofit, but it was great. Like we had, what do you call LaCroix water. We had a lot of snacks. I thought, listen, I was in heaven. We had these like Apple laptops and we were walking around. It was an open space. I would listen, you couldn't tell me nothing. I was like, I'm in the private sector. Okay, this is how we do it. I was enthused at my new environment, like for show. I was just enthused all around. Okay, all around. It was just like a whole thing. So anyway, so so here's the deal. Like I worked as a strategist, a business strategist, that is. And there was a PM team, there was like UX team, and there was, other strategists too that would work on like marketing, because it was a marketing firm, marketing branding firm type of thing. So anyway, we never saw like the contract itself. So when you're in a role where you are a part of a team, whether you're leading out the team or you may be someone that is also a part of the team, you're not going to see a contract. You will see something like a project brief, or you'll see maybe a scope of work statement that perhaps the PM may have. But essentially, you're going to see a brief that's essentially going to say it's the who, the what, the where, what's the scope, what's everybody doing, and like what is, like how we're, like when the kickoff meeting is and all that other stuff. So what is going to be important as a project manager is that you understand, whoever is handling accounts and accounts management and all that other good stuff, you want to make sure that there is a clear understanding of the deadlines, the deliverables, and making sure that there is this set expectation of what's actually feasible and what's not. Like you got to get an understanding then. Hopefully, because you're in a larger agency, a lot of this stuff in terms of like protecting of the time and all this other stuff, a lot of that stuff should be already, the precedent should already be set, because you got the accounts people and all that working directly with the client. And then once you get the new business, there should be some sort of meeting that's hosted between yourself, maybe the account manager, and saying, hey, this is what's about to happen. We got this new client. Give me the deets, what we're supposed to do. What are we building? What are we essentially executing on? Who's going to be a part of it? So you're figuring out all of these types of things. And so I think one of the things that is super important is, even when it comes, well, and we can get into like client workflow stuff a little bit later, but yeah, you understanding the scope of work is vital. So while you may not have the actual contract in front of you, you gotta at least know the scope. Excuse me. You gotta at least know the scope of it. So I just wanted to put that in context for those that are in larger agencies, and you may not, like I said, you may not set foot into getting an email that's going to, or be in a meeting that's gonna like have the contracts. Okay. elements of a contract, and then we're going to get into how to handle client changes. Okay, y'all, here's the thing. What should you include in a contract? Well, I'm so glad that you asked it. We understand why it matters. We went through all of that. But like, what goes into it? What goes into it? So what I want to just go over, there's like about 8 of them that I want to list out. And I will probably go over just a couple of them, and then we're going to go into how to handle client changes in the middle of a project. So first things first is that you want to have inside of a contract, you want to have contact information, payment terms, scope of work, termination clause, cancellation clause, confidentiality clause, indemnification clause, and type of service. So the 3 things that I want to highlight for you all is the payment terms and the scope of work. So I want to say payment term, scope of work. And then I also want to just highlight, I think this is really good too, the termination clause and the cancellation clause. Okay. And I think this is super important. So when we talk about payment terms, this is where, again, it can maybe get a little hairy when it comes to the payment terms. What essentially what you're doing here is you're outlining when you are going to get paid, right? So it depends on the type of service that you have. It may be that you have a deposit up front. It may be that there is a schedule for your payments. It all depends on the business and the structure. What's going on, Shakira? Good to see you. And Next Best Step Housing. So when we are looking at that, when we are looking at the payment terms, be very clear up front, especially during a discovery call. This is again for my project managers, my freelancers. Be very upfront about this money. When you're going to get paid. I'm big on deposits because I believe deposits are the first steps for the being invested into the work. And then have a schedule of when the next payment is going to be. But it should be pretty standard. It should be pretty standard on that term. Okay. So when we are looking at the scope of work, again, listing out everything that's in that proposal, put it in the contract. I'm telling you, looking at when you have these hiccups, when these clients come and they say, hey, I want to add on to the work, or they have an issue with what's going on, you want to go back to the contract and say, this is what we've agreed upon, the scope of work. And I'm telling you, that's the biggest number one issue that we as consultants and service providers have. It's really going back to what was originally agreed upon. What was on that signature when you signed it? What did we agree upon? So that's super important, like making sure everything is set in stone when it comes to that. So when we talk about even the scope of work, we want to talk about defining the timelines. We want to talk about the number of revisions. We want to talk about communication protocols, like how we're going to communicate and everything. That is going to be super important as well. And revisions are going to be key, because especially if you are doing any work as a graphic designer, if you were doing a work as a podcast editor, if you were doing work as a content creator, maybe you're creating for other brands and things, social media creator, right? You do all the things there. Then you want to make sure that you have project timelines, milestones, the number of revisions, and then any type of optional add-ons. So when we get to that section, when we're talking about, can you add on work, we're going to talk about the additional add-ons. So if there's revisions on an already existing piece of work, you got to have that outline inside of the project. Got to have that, inside of the contract. You got to have that there. Does that make sense? Who has questions about this? Who has questions? These are just things that we need to be thinking about to protect ourselves, protect our clients, protect our time, right? Our resources, the project itself, all of that. All of that. Okay, y'all. This is some good stuff. I listen, I'm enjoying what we doing, what we vibing on, y'all. All right. So this is interesting. The termination clause. This is where it gets a little dicey because sometimes, just depending on what we're doing, then we have to be able to look at if things go too far. If things are going left on the project, termination could be an option. A change order has to be in the contract. Thank you so much for adding that. Change order. Appreciate that a lot. So when we look at the termination clause, we're looking at, is either party, the client or you as the business owner, are we allowed to legally separate, essentially? Can we just cut and dry and say, I'm out, right? And so this is why it's so important that you have this inside of your contract. You got to have a termination clause. So let's break that down a little bit. What we're talking about with termination clause, we're talking about, can we make sure that we have clearly defined protocols in place to make sure cancellations can happen? Okay. Breaking that down, let's put that into, what do you call, layman's terms. When can we notify that we want to be out of this agreement? And how can we do it without being disruptive? That's what we're saying. That's what when we say about terminating, we like, all right, I want to be out. Like, I don't like the work that's going on and I'm out. Yes, structure those termination clause and terms and fees. That's exactly it. So some things I think is important is that to know is that there could be a penalty. And I think that's really important, is that if a contract is ended early, there's some decisions that have to be made. Some people may say, hey, I want all my money back. Whoop. What do you mean you want your money back? Some people are in the contract say, hey, once you pay, you pay. You ain't getting nothing back, right? Again, contractually speaking, you want to speak with an attorney. You want to kind of get someone that can advise you on how to set this up properly. So again, it protects you and it protects the client. Okay. And so this is why going into business and, you're performing services, it's a risk if you don't have anything legally in place. It's a huge issue. It's a huge issue. So that's my point with the termination clause. Let me know in the comments if you have any other comments or questions about that. But essentially what we're talking about when we're saying the termination clause, we're saying, hey, like, can we, if certain conditions are met, can one or both parties say, I'm out. But that's a little bit different from a cancellation clause. Okay. So this is like, when we talk about actually canceling a clause, excuse me, that just means that the client has disappeared. Who has witnessed this? A client has gone ghost. That has happened to me. Let's raise our hands. That has happened to me 1,000%. So what do you do? And this is what makes it really interesting. What's going on? I am Leo 888. Thanks for joining. So cancellation clauses we're looking at it when inside of the contract. This is what it does. It outlines a recourse if one party breaches the agreement. Okay. Oftentimes we're not necessarily thinking that, we'll need to cancel a contract, but these things happen. Cancellation clauses. This is what, by definition, I did some research on this. Cancellation clauses define acceptable versus unacceptable reasons for contract cancellation, steps each party must take when canceling an agreement, and how to calculate cancellation damages. Okay. So if a client decides to disappear and stops communication, and you have invested time into resources into a fixed price agreement, all right, you could have a cancellation clause because the client has breached the contract. Okay. Now, the difference is, and you're probably wondering, okay, Ashley, termination versus cancellation. And I'll just put a little note in there. Definitely, get with an attorney to make sure that you're understanding the legal perspective from this. But when we're talking about termination versus cancellation clause, here's what we're talking about. We're talking about they allow either party to end an agreement if certain conditions are met. Okay, that's what we're looking at. And so what you want to do is that you want to understand in the contract, you want to outline what is the valid termination grounds, what's the required notification, and what is the post termination, what's the financial and the intellectual property piece. What does that mean? See, we get real wordy today, but I love it. I think this is super important to note because, again, the work is super complex these days. There's a lot always going on. People are creating new things. Folks want things quick, fast, and in a hurry, and that's not always the case. Or we're looking at really big visions and really big things. And so I think it's really important that we're understanding what's being brought to the table, what we're doing, why we're doing it, and what happens when things kind of go left. Okay. So those are the 4 different areas that I just wanted to go into: the payment terms, the scope of work, the termination clause, and the cancellation clause. Last but not least, how to handle client changes in the middle of a project. Okay. So here's the deal. And I've had this happen before. This is what you do. You get that meeting, and put any comments that you have in the chat, please. Yeah, I definitely want to know what comments that you all have. Put them in the so here's the deal. Here's what I did, or here's what I do. Client says, "Hey Ashley, I'd love it if you were able to add another workflow, to this particular PM tool setup that you're going to do." That cool. Let's meet about it. I'm going to go and look at the original agreement in the contract. I have an Instagram reel on this. I'm going to see what did I put in the contract that says we can add or not add anything to the scope of work. Like what are the steps that need to happen? And like I said, this LinkedIn user said it correctly, change order, right? Some sort of change request, as we like to call it. So that's perfect because, again, at the end of the day, hypothetically speaking, the work can be done. But again, it's at what cost? You know what I'm saying? It's at what cost can we do it? Can we do this work? Right? Okay, cool. So we're getting a meeting together. So get the meeting together with your client. But what you want to do is you want to see in your contract, all right, what are the steps that we need to take? Right? What are the steps that we need to take to ensure that we can add to the scope? My thing is always this, is that here's a couple things. Number one, it's always going to cost something, right? You shouldn't be doing any extra work for free. It's always going to cost something. Number two, the timeline will change, but that depends on, how big the change is. Also number three is you also want to make sure too, resources wise, that you can do it. And you want to also assess how risky is it if we take on this extra work. Okay, they can and they do sometimes overlap, but when you define them appropriately so that it's clear what a cancellation is versus what initiates a termination. Ooh, very good. Thank you so much for that. Because, I was all up in my legalese. Change request initiates the change order. Ooh, that's so good. So something I think that is important to note about this is that inside of your process or your workflow, something that you should be doing is having a form and saying to your client, hey, I have a form. You can put that in fill out, Airtable. You can do a CODA form. You can do a ClickUp form if you want. Asana has forms now. Whatever format you want to do it, you can say, hey, could you put this in so that we can review it? I love that. Put the onus back on the client. Meet with them, chat it up. see what is feasible. And also too, I think it's really important again to outline to the client what a change and the impact it's going to be for the overall project. Now, those that again, you're freelancing, you're at your company, whatever, and what have you, you got to make also an executive decision based upon who you're working with, if you're working with other contractors, and also like what does your project roadmap look like? Is adding on this particular scope of work, will that delay the start of another project? So you have to look too about internally in terms of your client load, if that actually makes sense. So just something to think through, as well. I wanted to add one more point is after you've reviewed the contract, you've assessed the work and everything, you definitely want to make sure that there's an amendment to the contract, right? Make sure there's an amendment to the contract, get the signature, get it documented, submit the invoice, and only then you go and you build out. In between that time, you go ahead and build out inside of your PM tool, add those additional tasks. If it's you doing the work or if you're working with someone to do the work, make sure you clearly explain to them what the change is, and you can go about executing the work at hand. But I felt it was super important that tonight, as we wrap up, as we talk through client contracts and setting healthy boundaries, I think it's really important that we are super clear on why it is that we may take on this work, what we need to do to protect ourselves and our client, and also to ensure that we remain professional throughout the whole entire process. This process, if you do it right, you'll always come out on top. And so a few things that I wanted to also highlight too is that your client workflows are just as important as what's in the client contract. So I put something on LinkedIn that said 3 client workflows for successful projects. One of them was client the client accepts the deliverable. I forgot how I said it, but essentially you want to have a workflow for your client for the first draft, for sign off for the first draft. Let's say you're a website designer, a graphic designer, you want a signature of some sort or a check mark or something that they reply to that says, and that can be automated, that says to you, hey, I've looked at this deliverable and I love it. Then when you finalize it, you also want something else, another workflow to say this has been approved. And then if there is a dispute on about the work, you also want to make sure there's a process for that too. So the contract is one piece of it, and you can go about making sure that you have everything legally together, but then complement that with your workflows. And again, these two pieces are outside of you actually doing the work itself. So I just wanted to point this out because as we continue in the summer, there's going to be brand new projects popping up. People are already prepping for Q3 and for Q4. And so, we're going to be doing some great and dynamic work, but just wanting everyone to be prepared, as I know sometimes these client issues are an ongoing thing. There's no such thing as the perfect scenario, but you can improve your client work and your experience by having these healthy boundaries. And that starts with the contract. All right, everybody. Thank you all so much for tuning in. This has been splendid. And I look forward to being with you all next week. Thank you all so much. Make sure that you like, subscribe, and send this to about 5 to 7, 8, 85 people who need to understand, hey, we are about setting healthy boundaries, and that starts with our client contracts. All right, everybody. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.